and welcome to the expert discussion Poland and Ukraine in the fight against the propaganda of the Kremlin. It's quite illustrative that here today we have both Polish and Ukrainian experts the next day after the inauguration of Palyvoda, the new president of Poland, and hopefully this event will demonstrate that the strategic partnership of Poland and Ukraine in lots of aspects is not only undeniable but also a dynamically evolving one with huge potential. We have lots to be discussed and hopefully we'll find common grounds not only today from our interpreters. And by the way, we are broadcasting this event in both Ukrainian and English languages on YouTube. We ask our participants to kindly make their speeches straight into the mic to ensure proper quality of the interpretation, since we're discussing such important issues here today. So, not to waste any more time, I would like to pass the floor to Piotr Lukasiewicz, the temporary plenipotentiary of Poland to Ukraine, and then I will keep moderating this discussion. Thank you. Yeah.
For the invitation to this, well, at least in my time in Ukraine, first time I have a honor and privilege to speak with such esteemed audience and to the audience in online about the issues that are so much defining our not only politics but are defining our environment, our lives. Disinformation and, well, I like to use the word lies or propaganda rather than disinformation, are unfortunately influencing big global politics, regional politics, but also lives of the ordinary people. And that's why it's so important, and I'm so much grateful for Institute of the World Politics and Mr. Magda that he organized this meeting. I would like to thank Ukrinform, very truthful organization fighting with disinformation as well, as a kind of a role model in honest and reliable source of news, source of analysis and information about the global politics, and also about the Polish-Ukrainian relations. It's very important that we are meeting. On one side there are Polish diplomats here, also Polish-Ukrainian journalists present here, but also it's very important that actually this event is organized by the NGO, by the civil society organization that approached us with the invitation. Because when you analyze, when you look and when you research the disinformation in the modern media, in the modern life, you will very quickly notice that on the front line there is always an NGO fighting disinformation. For the governmental institutions, for authorities, it's quite difficult. It's government as a source of information is also always met with some prejudices, with some positions that it's the political position of the state that is represented by the officials, by authorities, and sometimes this truth might be distorted according to the interests of the person speaking, and this is the place and time where NGOs enter the fray, enter the game of fighting disinformation, and they are actually the ones that are doing it, I would say, most effectively. They are the ones who are trying and succeeding with fighting disinformation, explaining what is actually something that we sometimes call the objective truth of the specific matter, and they are, well, they became in the last few years, decades maybe, an important actor in fighting disinformation, and that's why we are meeting right now at the table, which is not a round table, but nonetheless, we are meeting at the table with the NGOs, media organizations, and also governmental institution like the diplomatic representation in Poland. So that's very important. This alliance of media, NGO, and diplomacy is so much important in this endeavor, in this actually a sacred task of fighting propaganda, fighting totalitarian propaganda, especially. So thank you very much for organizing this event. Speaking of fighting disinformation, of course, the obvious source which we are dealing with right now is totalitarian regimes. Here, being in Ukraine, there is one obvious candidate for the name of totalitarian regime spreading disinformation, which is obviously Russia. And but the disinformation is spread not between Russia and Poland, Russia and Ukraine, but rather what we are very much concerned on is that the disinformation is kind of trying to destroy the relations between Poland and Ukraine. So there is a triangle. The source is Russia, but the real goal of the disinformation is to sow distrust between our states, between our communities. So the source is out there, and Poland and Ukraine are the kind of victims of it. And what we should do is obviously we should try to limit this spread of disinformation. We should try to notice when something like this happens. But when there is a Polish-Ukrainian discussion, when concerning almost every aspect of our bilateral relations, be it agriculture, historical discussion, political discussion, there is always this known factor when Pole and Ukrainian are speaking to each other and discussing so-called hard issues between us. There is always one factor that we should remember, think of, and remember. When we are arguing, when Poland and Ukraine argues on something, one who benefits is always Russia. So that's with this approach, I believe it's our task of fighting disinformation. It will be a little bit easier, knowing that Russia could benefit from the arguments we would have. Sometimes, of course, these arguments between Poland and Ukraine, they are very often objective. There are objective problems between our countries, like in every neighboring situation. But when the discussion becomes too emotional, when the discussion becomes too emotional, personal, and heated, and going into dangerous areas, we should always remember that Russia benefits from that. And having this understanding would help us navigate difficult, but nonetheless brotherly, neighborly relations towards the better understanding of each other and better relations in the future. It will be much easier to have this conversation between Poland and Ukraine on many issues. It will be very much easier to do so when you will be part of the so-called transatlantic organizations, meaning European Union and NATO. Really, these two platforms make discussions, make also fighting disinformation much easier, and where we have this kind of when there is another actor that connects us, and again, this actor, this platform is European Union and in the future also NATO. That will make our conversation much more objective and much easier and much more better protected against the malicious Russian influence. So again, thank you very much for organizing that, and I'm really open to hear the discussion that will start soon, and maybe there will be some questions and the discussion ongoing. So I'm all yours. Thank you very much.
Дякую, пане полковнику. Я не помилився, тому що...
Thank you, Colonel, and not being mistaken in calling him so, Mr. Lukasiewicz has the military rank of a colonel. So, since there's an ongoing war at the border with Poland, that's one more thing I intentionally mentioned. Now I'd like to pass the floor to Dmytro Zolotukhin, a well-known expert on various information campaigns, including information warfare campaigns. So, can you set the tone to the discussion, please? My colleagues checked with me whether I'm colonel as well. No. I'm just an unenlisted personnel. So, thank you for inviting me as well, and I'll try to stay brief. First of all, I fully agree with what temporary plenipotentiary Mr. Lukasiewicz just mentioned, because when we look at the general context, it all starts with the words, and that's why I liked that he started his speech with differentiating between propaganda and lies, because just calling them fakes does not fully describe what's really going on. And I would like to also thank the Polish counterparts for all the bilateral relations that happened in the Ministry of Culture and Strategic Communications. Former Minister Tuchinski and Deputy Minister Andriy Nadjas, who is still holding his job, spared no efforts. Somehow it's fortuitous to hear the bell sound of my phone interrupting me, but anyway, this cooperation between our two teams involving diplomats led to fruitful results, like currently the works on exhumation and search works. This is the project that would involve both of our countries. We agreed that we are not going to be disseminating the information about what's going on there, because currently it's just done with the involvement of experts only. And like was mentioned before, if you stay emotional when discussing such emotional issues, it causes, it brings certain vulnerabilities to arise, making people make some emotional outbursts, which is okay for people who live under such difficult, painful reality, which is even difficult to analyze without psycho-emotional reaction. So we just need to be aware of such vulnerabilities and try, as Mr. Temporary Plenipotentiary mentioned, do everything possible to treat it somberly, analytically, making sure that ultimately we will receive beneficial outcome for both of our people. Not just blaming, playing the blaming game, but jointly decided what would be a win-win result for both of our two people. So I have a dozen of years of experience working in combating Kremlin's informational warfare operations, and I can tell you that all they're doing, they are looking to find such vulnerabilities that usually stem from some unattentive emotional outbursts, and they use those vulnerabilities. It's important to recognize that sometimes this is something that could not be easily explained in terms of what are fakes and what are could be treated as disinformation, because sometimes it talks about real events that happened in real history, but the emotional exposure is used as our vulnerability, and we experts often enough call it reflexive management or reflexive control. When Russia, when our opponent, enemy, tries, as was correctly mentioned, make a better use of the existence of tensions in this bilateral dialogue, and we've seen this when Russia was carrying out the psychological operations against us when we launched this project on search and exhumation operations. We all remember their information inputs that would make those emotional topics to become toxic, so that both sides will start blaming each other. And in my humble opinion, I call it not only dissemination of lies, but this is a reflection, control, and cognitive warfare operations. And I like that both in the world media and here domestically in Ukraine, we start talking about cognitive warfare. Thus, there is a so-called cognitive advantage in infosphere when we can keep the focus of public's attention on the topics that are of importance to us, and never react emotionally to the Russian attacks. So that's the way to start being innovative in this fight, because as it happens, the landscape of fakes and disinformation now evolves, because Russia now focuses all on vulnerabilities that could not be labeled as just lies. They benefit from capitalizing on making two parties go tooth and nail at each other, and there are numerous recent psyop operations aimed at disrupting the constructive dialogue between Ukrainian and Polish sides. Thank you, and I will gladly entertain your questions. Thank you, Dmytro. And thank you for not only theoretical conclusions, but also thank you for illustrating with real-life examples how it happens, which allows me to give the floor to Mr. Piotr Kaszuwara, the next keynote speaker, person who for a couple of years now frequently and regularly visits Ukraine, crystallizing his own understanding of how to better counter Russian propaganda. Thank you, and thank you for inviting me here. I will try to address you in Ukrainian, since I've mentioned that I've been to Ukraine for a couple of years. It was ample of time to learn the language. Something that we have heard before and now in the context of the Ukrainian-Polish dialogue. Every time we are at the negotiation table, Russia appears unawares and tries to stop us. That's exactly what was happening before, but not today, because that's why we are sitting here together and discussing what could be changed with our involvement. In 2024, the foundation, the Future of Ukraine, decided that the help of Ukrainian people, both at the front lines and in the rear, is only one thing that we can do. But as the journalists, we launched the PostPravda.info project. This website is combating Russian propaganda. We need to clearly recognize that propaganda is not only fake news and disinformation using Facebook, Twitter, other social media, but this is a psychological warfare operation. And those psyops have been carried out by Russia not only against Ukraine and Poland, but against the whole world. From the time of the existence of KGB, they have launched such psyops back in 1950s. So for more than half a century, Russia is trying to use divide and rule approach in respect to the West, using propaganda as weaponizing propaganda, because they clearly recognize now that the word is a weapon. What's the advantage? Russia never had, still doesn't have, and unfortunately most likely will not be a democratic state for quite a long time. There will be no independent journalists, there will be no independent media, and the Kremlin controls everything, including information, like it was back in the USSR and now in Russia, where they control every single printed word. Every word we can hear from them, and there is a huge threat and danger in that, because all the operations I've mentioned so far allows them to make long-term plans, like for dozens of years, looking forward. It's not like something that came to their mind last week and now they launch it. No, it's something that they have in fruition for 10, 20, 30 years. I call them university professors of propaganda. I mean, those guys in Russia, because they treat it quite seriously. And what I mean by this, they try not only to impact the Western society, but also to control their own society. So that triangle that Mr. Ambassador mentioned is just one of those mechanisms that the Russian propaganda uses to make third parties, even third countries, as their mouthpiece, loudspeaker. So making statements by proxy, using those agents of influence. People who are publishing things for a long time that we basically agree with, but then overnight they turn into propagandists. And often enough, they are being labeled as internet trolls. And I hate this terminology, because when you use it, it sounds like it's an urban myth or like a cartoon character, which they're not. They are a menace, a threat, because currently the Russian Federation has at least 3 brigades of uniformed soldiers, I mean, wearing business suits, but in their offices, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, all they do is dumping disinformation on the West. So hopefully we'll continue with our events like this today, because there is so much to be discussed. Today we kickstart with discussing Ukrainian-Polish relations, but we can still see a couple of topics that Russia also likes to make use of uh, historical events, assistance to Ukraine, and there is the Art of War book that every of those propaganda officers uh, learn in their propaganda universities. And the Art of War book says to be victorious in the war, you don't have to necessarily yield a weapon, because the highest value is to seize and capture the country without destroying it. That's what Sun Tzu. So propaganda is exactly the type of the weapon that doesn't have to destroy the buildings or destroy the whole countries, but it has to destroy the peace of mind of the society, of the people of the defending country, stopping any hope to get assistance from the partners. It twists the whole society into basically enemies of other states, like what we observe in Poland. And unfortunately, not only we, our two countries, but any country, probably except for US. None of us have the real understanding how to combat propaganda in a comprehensive manner. Well, like I said, in Poland, we can see that what Russian propaganda is trying to do is to put a stop to any assistance coming to Ukraine, so that people will treat each other as enemies, using Volyn events back in 1943 as the pretext for this, because that topic is quite divisive. And if we look at the recent publications, by the way, this is the last thing I want to mention here. So if we look at the publications about Volyn tragedy, how it's being presented in the Polish media until 2014, they were quite rare. But after 2014, the number of publications about Volyn tragedy increased thousandfold. Between 2014 and 2016, we had almost 3,000 of those publications. Then, each year adding at least one publication. Before 2014, we had less than 100 in all the previous years. So you can clearly see why this topic is of so much importance to the Russians. There is a Polish propagandist who works in Donetsk. Quite recently, in 2024, they even made a documentary about him in Moscow. And so two topics he touches in that documentary is, one, Volyn tragedy and the ongoing war in Ukraine. So these are two narratives that we can hear a lot in Polish media. And domestically, we discuss it in Poland, and Russia just benefits from it. They just don't even have to create the narrative. They rarely invent their own narratives. They make good use of what already exists. So it's our job to spot that and to explain to people that these are the type of narratives that Russian propaganda is being capitalizing on. How can we combat it? By creating our own narratives and initiating them, and that's exactly what we're doing here today. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Piotr. And it's true that Russia is quite proactive and quite treacherous, as always. And unfortunately, the Russians are well aware of our weaknesses. You know, it's like in a rom-com where it takes only two to tango, not three. So, how to investigate and publicize our investigation results about Russian propaganda, and that's Mr. Palyvoda, whom I will pass the floor to now, being the scientist and academician, also a person with a diplomatic track record. He was able to observe how the Russians behaved when they were vegetarians, so to speak. Thank you, Yevhen. And it's true, when I was starting working in the Ukrainian embassy to Warsaw in 1989, I observed how the Russian diplomats, including Russian spies, of course, how they were trying not only to curse the Ukrainian diplomats, but the Polish counterparts and Polish society at large as well. But Piotr started discussing the background history, and I would also like to echo with him. It's the intelligence agencies, the KGB, what Russia is using as a tool to affect and curse the whole world globally. But in the context of our today's discussions, our two countries, Poland and Ukraine, for sure. In 1991 and 92, I was working in Moscow, so the Soviet Union was disintegrating in front of my eyes, and the Russians were starting getting ready to create their footholds here in Ukraine. And they did this by using such coercive methods as recruitment and personnel policies. Like in 1984, 1989, the first department of KGB of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic was headed by General Colonel Leonid Makarov. He worked in Ukraine for 5 years, and having a huge list of agents and moles, and you should all understand that back in 1989, we already have the Narodny Ruch, the national movement here in Ukraine, quite proactive. So they were trying to react to that. So then Count General Makarov was transferred back to the headquarters in Moscow and was the head of this first department for a number of years, and it was the department's focus on the US. And then he became the head of Service A in the KGB that Mr. Piotr mentioned. But Mr. Piotr, it actually was created not only in the 50s, but based on the Unit D, which was back in 1940s. I don't know what D stands for, but I think disinformation most likely. That's why they call it Unit D, right? So General Makarov working in the Service A team, and then when under the leadership of Primakov, the KGB was transformed. By the way, his grandson now is an officer of this PSYOPs against Ukraine. So his granddad was the head of UMS, the Department of Coercion. So basically they stopped hiding behind such terms as influence. They started using it coercion. That's why it was quite obvious what they were trying to coerce us to do. And in light of the modern information warfare, we need to recognize that Russia launched this information warfare and disinformation campaigns against us, not in 2014, but back in 1991. So Russia was getting itself ready, was making footholds ready, was recruiting agents, and then when we had Kuchma as the president, especially when Yanukovych was, Russians were already harvesting what they have sown, because the citizens of the Russian Federation were the heads of the Ukrainian security service, SBU. Their spies were operating here freely. Also officers of the Russian intelligence, and including military intelligence. But then, with the first Maidan, the European Maidan in 2004 happened, the Orange Revolution, Russia started spending a lot to revamp their info war affair against us. Since 2015, annual costs for Russia to run disinformation campaigns in the West were as high as $4.5 billion. But to destabilize the situation in Ukraine, according to Ukrainian intelligence, Russia was ready to spend 1.5 billion. So you can see 4.5 for the whole West and 1.5 separately earmarked for Ukraine. So, but still, Russia could not even imagine itself to be a mighty empire without Ukraine being subjugated. So when Unit A launched its information warfare against US, it was done mostly by intelligence agencies, but now the tools and the main promoters of that war at the strategic level became the President Putin himself, who all of a sudden turned into a historian, writing the article about the historical unity of the Ukrainian and Russian peoples. Of course, it was not written by him. His ghostwriter was Medinsky, who was born in the town of Smila, Cherkasy region. So, unfortunately, born and raised in Ukraine. So, this information warfare against Ukraine was joined by deputy chairperson of their National Council for Security and Defense, and he published the articles claiming that in all 300 years of Ukraine's presence in the Russian Empire, it was never a subjugated or a colonized person. Can you imagine something like that in Austro-Hungarian Empire? But of course he is lying, because we already know how the Ukrainian language was banned from being used or taught. So it's just pure manipulation. So if both Putin and Medvedev are lawyers by background, but Sergei Naryshkin, the head of the military intelligence, who graduated from Leningrad Mechanical Institute as the radio mechanic. So, in addition to being the head of the Russian military intelligence, he's also the chairperson of the Russian Historical Society, which almost every day generates some drivel against Ukraine, claiming that the Kievan Rus should no longer be called so it's only Moscow from now on. So as we can see from that time, the information warfare against Ukraine has reached a strategically more important level, being directed directly from the Kremlin. As for the relations between Poland and Ukraine, well, they treat us as strategic partners. And that's what Dmytro has mentioned already. All those painful issues, like I remember once when I worked in this embassy in Warsaw, we even have the executive memo on the painful issues in the relations between Poland and Ukraine, of course, Volyn tragedy, among others. Today, before joining you at this roundtable discussion, after I have monitored some Russian websites, namely Top War, which describes some military and political topics, and today they published a large version of their editor's note in Polish, with quite fluent Polish. And so what they try to do is they are implying divide and impera, the divide and rule principle yet again. There is another well-known independent newspaper, Независимая газета, which a couple of days ago has started publishing articles about what Krzysztof Bosek, the vice marszałek of Polish Sejm. So he said that the law enforcement agencies of Poland want to introduce visas. And that's what Niezawissima Gazeta starts claiming, that the Polish government wants to introduce visa regime because, as they claim, Poland is tied from 2 million refugees, which is a lie again, because now it's less than 1 million there. So yet another manipulation with figures, with numbers. Then they said that the EU will be involved, but that's a clear information lie, that the Polish society can no longer stand Ukrainian refugees. Another example, Polish police arrested some Ukrainians who tried to set fire to a mall or whatever, well, again, another example of how the Russian intelligence agencies are usually operating. That's their playbook. They actually try to search among the refugees those who have some criminal records, or those who are willing to do their bidding for a small fee. So if they lose this so-called agent, well, good riddance, but at least it will, if it works, it will help to print such an article that could be titled "Ukrainians harm Europeans," and they actually help the European police to apprehend them, because the negative press is even better for them. Well, actually, we have time enough to listen to high-quality expert opinions, because if we want to fight post-truth as a phenomenon, then we need to be on top of things, and that's why Viktor Shlinchak, the head of the board of our institute, will share his own experience of both journalist and analytic in terms of the current status of the Ukrainian-Polish relationship. Thank you, Igor. Thank you, colleagues, for attending this discussion. Well, I remember 2023 for some reason. We had the economic forum in Karpachy, like an equivalent of Eastern European Davos discussion. We had close to 5,000 participants attending it, and in 2020 we had 2/3 of the panels having Ukrainian speakers attending them, and it was quite an interesting thing to observe. Being a speaker at one of the panels, I address our Polish colleagues to please start paying attention to the concerns that we had with some of the Polish domestic media, including some of the Telegram channels. But they haven't noticed my appeal. it seemed that Polish journalists didn't treat that to be a relevant topic for them to get concerned. So 2020, let me remind you, was the beginning of a number of very dubious elections happening in Poland, but back at that time everybody was treating Ukraine in a positive light, claiming that, well, Ukrainian people suffer from this ongoing war. That's why our two people have to joint efforts in combating disinformation. Poland did embrace the Ukrainian refugees who were fleeing Ukraine back in early 2022, which was a very generous gesture from the Polish authorities and the Polish people themselves. And then in 2023, we started observing a different trend. So 2023 is the year when, by the way, when at this forum in Karpacz, I reminded people about what I said back then, and nobody laughed at that time because it happened exactly after events against Durov in France, and now we understood where the wind is blowing from. We recognize that the tentacles from the Kremlin would try to wiggle into the crevices and empty spaces. And I believe that 2023 was the breakthrough year indeed, and being able to observe the results of numerous polls in Poland, I can tell you that at the level of the households, we can see that unfortunately the attitudes of Polish people towards Ukraine has evolved from positive to negative. I cannot 100% claim right now that this is the result of the Russia's involvement, but I can claim that the Russian intelligence was involved in that for sure, and all of us here have, of course, observed your previous election campaign, and we could see how the Russian bot farms and agents were peaking the number of disinformation publications in both Polish and global media, as the colleague mentioned, and for quite a while I thought the Polish authorities were too inactive. They should have grasped the time to go after those disinformation waves earlier, but that was back then. Right now, it's 2025. We have the new Russian authorities in place, the new Polish president in place, and so what I would suggest in terms of interpersonal relations between the presidents of our two countries, Zelensky and Novrotsky, is that you need to go back to the level of discussions at the consultation committee level.
A committee that never convened since 2021. Once they tried to reconvene using a video link, but this may become an important signal to be welcomed by the Ukrainian society and the Polish political elite, which is in the process of transformation. So it might be a very positive development. Thank you, Ambassador. I would like to offer
to follow my obligations and go to the meeting actually devoted to the Polish-Ukrainian relations on the global scene in the presidential office. So excuse me for that. Let me use this 9 minutes to it's not a response, it's just an observation. It is a task and the duty of the bodies like this, of the meetings like this, of the meetings of experts, to actually be able to understand, clarify, and divide disinformation and internal politics of the countries. So I'm not protesting, but I just want to observe that quoting a politician during the campaign, Polish official from the parliament or the official government politician, almost in a one sentence with thesis of disinformation spreading, is not actually fighting disinformation. Because this is actually mixing politics, which is normal. Democratic countries have divisions of votes, divisions of views, not votes, sorry, views, various spectrum of political positions. It's very easy to use disinformation as a kind of a, hammer to beat this or that politician, especially when he's a actually important one, like a president. It's very easy to use this disinformation as a tool to justify your own politics. So that's why, if you notice my public speeches in Ukraine, I never use example of this or that politician from Ukraine, because first it would be me overstepping the boundaries of internal politics of Ukraine, and second, it's just not working. If you address this or that politician, especially saying, oh, this is the source of his words are Russian disinformation. This is what actually makes us more divided rather than unified in the, again, very sacred task of fighting Russian disinformation. So especially it's for experts to understand that not every politics is about disinformation. That, for instance, the problems or it's not a problem like a problem, it's just a phenomena of relations between Ukrainian refugees and Polish communities is something of a real issue that should be attended by various means. Governmental, societal, self-governance. I mean, there are many tools to address these issues. It's not always disinformation. It's not always something to be used against this or that politician or this or that political party. It's very important that professional approach to disinformation is not going into the fray, going into the political fight or this or that country or state. That's very important to remember that, again, the enemy, maybe I don't want to use the word enemy, the source of disinformation, the source of lies, the source of propaganda that is against democratic societies is somewhere else. It's out there in Kremlin, of course, in our European environment. But again, speaking against particular politician, particular party, particular phenomena is not the. I don't believe it's. I believe it's not the right thing to address the real issue. That is the propaganda or the source of lies, which is of course Kremlin. This is maybe it's not an intervention. It's not a comment. It's just an observation that I have, also based on my experience fighting disinformation in my previous professional career as a journalist as well. Second thing, we know the tools of the totalitarian regime. You are professionals. You have a quick access, a quick understanding of what is disinformation, what is not. it's important for us to actually to be able to produce tools. The best it would be that it is the unified tool, Polish-Ukrainian in this case, against this disinformation, against this propaganda war that is being fought against the democratic societies of the Central Europe, generally speaking. So I'm very much hopeful that such gathering like today will be able to actually to came up with the ideas that would help governments, me including as a representative of the government, and hopefully also Ukrainian government, to find the common tools, to find the common ground on fighting this disinformation. And I'm actually very happy to report of what Mr. Dmytro said, that we have such tools right now with the Ministry of Culture, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Polish and Ukrainian, actually trying to construct, trying to invent the tools with the very much united positions of Ministry of Culture, both Ukrainian and Polish, with the Foreign Ministry, as you could have a chance to observe that during the last meeting of Minister Sikorski with Minister Sybiha. These are actually the tools that are on the governmental side. So instead of talking about this or that politician, let's look at the governmental tools that we already possess. And second part of it is actually you, NGOs, civic society, non-governmental bodies that are able to create such unified position against Russian propaganda. With that, unfortunately, I have to leave. Thank you very much, and I wish you a very good conversation. And again, I wish you to be able to produce the ideas that both officials from Ukraine and Poland could use in their task, in their duty to defend both of our countries, Ukraine and Poland, against the Russian lies. Thank you very much.
Дякую дуже, пане полковник.
Thank you, Colonel Lukasiewicz. Oh, okay. Acting charge d'affaires. With this, may I invite Stanislav Zhekhovsky, who is following very closely Ukrainian-Polish relations for many years. Thank you very much for the floor and of course for the invitation to take part in this important and very timely event. And I would also like to appreciate the speakers before me for informative and seminal speeches that help make our conclusions. Indeed, I can challenge the statement that both Ukraine and Poland have a bunch of sensitive issues to resolve, which is probably natural because both countries are, so to speak, at the front line of the democratic world's battle waged against the totalitarian, authoritarian regimes. Yes, our relations haven't been very gentle and easy all the time, and it was difficult to defeat Russia's attempts at dividing us in a coordinated manner. So if we recall what has been happening in the past century, we should recognize that after 1920, our, so to speak, paths have parted after the war with the Bolshevik Russia. Unfortunately, Ukraine could not carry on as an independent state, unlike Poland, and Ukraine wasn't for quite some time in its attempts to fight Bolshevism. Poland also was struck hard. It was only in the end of the 20th century that both nations could break out of the Russian, so to speak, arms. But unfortunately, like I say, our attempts were not well coordinated. Maybe Ukraine wasn't Ukraine's reaction to the Russian Federation wasn't vigorous enough. Ukraine preferred to treat Russia as its long-standing partner. The Russian TV and internet resources had access to the Ukrainian audiences. There were years when it was very difficult to find a Ukrainian title in Ukrainian bookstores, unlike Russian titles, unlike Ukraine, Poland in the 90s and the beginning of this century was better fit, and then the Polish language as a factor of unity played its role. Poles never forgot about their history, so Poland, to put it frankly, was way ahead of Ukraine, which helped Poland stand fast. More recently, at least after 2014, when the Russo-Ukrainian war started, the situation too started to evolve. Ukraine had a head start as compared to Poland because it had to deal with the Russian aggression firsthand, and I find it quite welcome that you can't access Russian TV channels or internet resources without the pain. So I think that we've overcome those tragic lag and will one day be in a much better position to work together with Poles, reinforcing our relations, carrying on the reminiscences of the very recent years. I'd say yes, there were other issues, maybe amplified by the certain splits in the Polish political society. I am, for one, not quite sure that the Polish-Ukrainian relations will once again be at its peak after the inauguration of the new Polish President, Karol Nawrocki. But on the other hand, I think that Ukrainians should do what they can in order to avoid any exacerbation of our relations. By the way, in Poland we also see that Poles are aware of the challenges on the table and the presence of Russia. By the way, that's another indicator of us being a bit ahead of Poland. We don't have Russian diplomatic missions functioning in Ukraine, whereas it's not the case in Poland. By the way, Polish and Ukrainian activists protested against the operation of the consular office at Gdańsk, the homeland of Solidarność. So it is important that the residents of Gdańsk supported Ukrainian activists. They even initiated a petition for shutting down this Russian consular offices, yet another, so to speak, source of Russian propaganda. Moreover, Gdańsk is very close to Krulewitz, to Königsberg, Kaliningrad, very close to Suwałki, where Russia can try and make any provocations. On May 9th this year, representatives of the Russian Consulate General were laying wreaths at the monument to Soviet soldiers, as if to emphasize that Russian soldiers liberated Poles or Ukrainians from foreign aggressors. Russia has often used this I will also say that Russia has on numerous occasions used the 9th of May to deploy various propaganda events, such as those Night Wolves bikers, in order to emphasize this frantic celebration. So I would certainly vote for shutting the Russian consular office at Gdansk, as it happened to do other offices. Russians, under the guise of diplomatic missions, try to use every opportunity to reinforce their propaganda, their disinformation, and I believe that Poland and Ukraine should also work in sync, achieving these goals. And I do hope that by joining forces we'll be able to suppress the Russian presence. And I'm quite sure that Russian agencies work as coordinators of various provocations. Remember the fire set to a Polish farmers market, or the attempts to stop traffic on the railways along which war supplies are moved to Ukraine. Well, we know that Karl-Nawrocki is of course again the Russian aggression against Ukraine, but we need to make sure that certain sensitive issues should interfere in our relations further on. So joint effort, joint events such as ours today could contribute to Poles and Ukrainians sparing no effort to defeat Russian disinformation and propaganda. Thank you. Before I invite Piotr Kaszuwara, I'll make an assumption jovially that our relations won't be, so to speak, resembled of the so-called rainbow, because rainbow has its other senses. You know, close to Gdansk, you can expect all kinds of espionage acts implemented by Russians, given the proximity to a naval base of Poland there, so Ukrainians and Poles could indeed contribute. Thank you. A very short intervention, if I may. Well, the fact that propaganda still exists is without a question. It is also unquestionable that propaganda is dangerous and toxic. We need to fight and defeat it. However, echoing Mr. Ambassador's observation, I would also call upon us to be very careful about identifying disinformation and distinguishing it from politics. Every Western nation is a democracy, and we need to understand that all these democracies are characterized by different views, voices, opinions, thoughts, and it doesn't always mean that some thoughts we don't like come from Russian narratives. Quite the opposite. Russian narratives are sometimes built upon this difference of opinion. They are instrumentalizing, weaponizing these differences. Volodymyr, I agree. Russians invest at least $4 billion annually to to fuel disinformation in the Western world. That's a lot of money. They have their, well, indeed, brigades whose mission is to generate and spread disinformation. Unfortunately, Western nations are yet to create something, some organizations, let alone a system. Probably our meeting today might initiate this process. I just wanted to say that we'll never be able to have an electronic warfare kind of thing against propaganda. Propaganda will always be around the corner, so to speak. So it is important to have adequate literacy to be able to readily respond to those toxic narratives. At the same time, let me finish by saying that a democracy is different from totalitarian regimes by having its differences of opinion. Thank you, Piotr. Dmytro, forgive my interfering, so to speak. I kind of proposal echoing Piotr's thoughts. I'd say there is no scenario that we can't exploit together, Poland and Ukraine, but you can work towards something or against something. I recall the time when I was dating my spouse, when we visited the museum of KGB. It was a strong impression. This year she went to Gdańsk, and when she came back she told me lots about the Museum of Solidarność. Well, we'll understand that propaganda, Russian propaganda, is quite strong in that region, but I'd say that the past decade has demonstrated when we just focus all our effort against Russia, the results are weak. When my wife told me about Solidarność Museum, about the fight against KGB, and when many people suffered, were killed in this fight against totalitarianism. So if we focus on something which is positive, this might be a very good alternative, because we have largely been talking about how we differentiate propaganda from political statements. Impossible, because the Russian agenda makes links to both. If we shift the focus on our bilateral relations, on the positive achievements in fighting totalitarianism, such as the Gdańsk Solidarność Museum, we become stronger. Thank you, Dmytro. May I now invite Anatoly Kurnosov, someone who's been monitoring Ukrainian and Polish relations. Today, his most recent article was posted in Radio Liberty. It would be too much to think that my article could once again make U.S. State Department review the decision to reopen the functioning of this radio station. Dmytro mentioned that being over-emotional may stem from vulnerability can stem from us being over-emotional, and this may also be the source of overgeneralization. Someone said something, look what Poles say, what Ukrainians do. This kills any discussion whatsoever. If we quote insults, it automatically triggers reflexive controls. Next, it is quite important to discuss what brings us together rather than divides us. Indeed, common enemy unites us, not as strongly, however, as it did a couple of years ago. But okay, let's imagine this common enemy is gone. Will there be nothing that unites us? What do we do? Start looking for another common enemy? It means that we have to look for what's in common between us, what was in the past, what will be in the future. There are many victories we share in the past, in the history. Historians could name quite a few, but for some reason we try to capitalize on differences, and for some other reason we try to concentrate on defeats rather than on glorious victories we have had. His Excellency Lukasiewicz said that Russia wins when we capitalize on our differences. How can we diminish those arguments? Probably someone in both of our societies need to initiate a discussion related to our common vision of the future. For instance, what we are talking about strategic partnership, but if you ask me, very few people are clear about what the strategic partnership in the future will imply in 5 years from now, in 10 years or 15 years from now. Are we playing to pan-European rules or trying to build some special bilateral relations and are trying to resolve them before they end up on the EC agenda? So I think we should really strive for a common strategic vision characterizing our relations in the future. His Excellency, the ambassador, also said that it would be easier to counter Russian propaganda if Ukraine became an EU member state and joined the NATO. It's a challenge. I brought a poll carried by Ibris for Portal for Defense 24 portal, which reveals for the first time in the past years that, according to the polls, 35% of Poles are for Ukraine joining EU, against 42 against, and the NATO. Again, for the first time, it seems that the public opinion in Poland swayed to so as you can see, this at least was an eye-opener for me. 46% of the society are for reducing assistance to Ukraine, and again in that same survey it was established that 53% of Poles could feel the influence of the Russian propaganda in the Polish mass media. Again, if a question were asked if, in your opinion, the Russian propaganda does have a bearing upon the Russian propaganda. More people would probably oppose that opinion. So we also need to be sensible here. And again, coming back to what I said with regard to a strategic discussion regarding our vision, I'd say it might be quite instrumental if we had an agreement, not the security agreement that's already in operation, but an agreement of our friendly relation and cooperation. It was signed in 1992. Some attempts were made in the context of Zelensky-Duda relations, but then it subsided. And one other thing that I think is doable, we observed a number of productive contacts at the level of the line ministries. Unfortunately, our media hasn't always been up to our expectations, highlighting these achievements. No matter how skeptical we are with regard to the national marathon or public media, I think that TV.info or the marathon, United Marathon, could at least once a week cover what happened on the positive side with regard to our agreements, so that the audiences can see it's not just controversy following another controversy, but joint effort and achievements. Piotr. Yes, if we are to look for some positive things between Poland and Ukraine, I could encourage you to mark tomorrow as the date when we can mark our joint victory over the Bolshevik Russia, August 8th, 1920. So it's cause for celebration. Thank you. As a moderator, let me try and draw some conclusions. If you ask me, the premise that Kremlin is very good at capitalizing the differences and controversies. However, I am the one who would use lemon to make lemonade. If Russia invests into destabilizing bilateral relations between Ukraine and Poland, these relations are positive. When Poland and Ukraine play together, Russia is defeated, as the Polish philosopher once mentioned. The Russian propaganda is well, evolving. A couple of years ago, Russia's attempt to introduce Telegram into the Polish social discourse full flipped flat. Now Russia is trying to instrumentalize migrants that are numerous, not only from Ukraine but other post-Soviet states. And this brings me to the issue of migrants and refugees. I agree. Oftentimes, some of them are happy to be recruited for money, but every Ukrainian migrant detained on suspicion of anti-Polish activity, we need to understand that the Ukrainian society is quick to respond to any fact of a Ukrainian migrant detained in Poland. Of course, amongst thousands and tens of thousands of migrants, there are people who are industrious and hardworking. They, 70% of Ukrainian refugees are in employment in Poland. But there are other black sheep. For instance, I noted that the Polish Ministry of Education decided 5 to 11 to change the conditions for enrollment with the Polish universities. It's not a critical event, but many Ukrainian families can be affected. I'm not saying that we should use that we should better communicate things like that to our societies. Being here at Ukraine Forum, I would like to propose that both Ukraine and Poland want more platforms where they could we think that Poles know Ukrainians very well and vice versa. I'm not talking about the present company. I just want to say that ordinary Ukrainians who fight for survival or have no time for that. I can only recall an initiative of the Polish radio and Suspilne on exchange of programming. I understand that the situation is challenging given the present state of legislative regulation, but the Volodymyr 1943 event is probably the most painful stimulus that negatively affects our relations. On the other hand, the righteous of Volodymyr, nominated by the Polish and Ukrainian presidents, could contribute to improvement of these relations. Generally, we probably need to take stock of the existing issues. At the government level, I may recall Pavel Koval and Polska Grupa Zbrojowa. I understand details of this visit are too sensitive given the national security, but I believe that a press point created at the embassy where Ukrainian media could meet Polish officials coming to Ukraine, and the similar or identical press point should probably be created at the Ukrainian embassy in Poland. You know the well-known Ukrainian proverb, she knew how to cook but never learned how to properly serve. We heard today about the value of joint victories. Of course, it did take more time to reconcile, but we really need to start from the history of common victories. So, August 1920. That's right, in September 2025, we should give a fight to the so-called Golden Autumn of 1939. We need to be united by common interest, not just by our common enemies. I am frustrated by this everlasting discourse about Polish politicians being pro-Polish versus pro-Ukrainian. Polish politicians will always be pro-Polish, and Ukrainian politicians will always be pro-Polish, but both Ukrainian and Polish politicians should be attentive to the developments in both countries. Take the news that Poland is about to start making its armed forces the most powerful in Europe. What about the Ukrainian wartime experience? I will probably write an article, Landscape for Karol Nawrocki. Why? Because I picture the current Polish president as a painter that is about to work with a canvas with an inscription, Volhynia bloodbath. And I think that this canvas shouldn't contain just one inscription. You know, can you imagine eating out at a restaurant where every single item is called Volhynia? Would that meet the expectations of Ukrainians and Poles? So there are some trends that look very dangerous, but in 2008, if we followed some trends, Ukraine would probably accept the Bucharest summit decision, and we would have probably been speaking Russian now here. Thank you very much for your attention. There's some time left you can use to ask a question of our speakers, all of them or any particular one. Andriy Svetlina, I am a human rights defender, religious and civic activist, and a journalist. There is a saying that you should treat the disease with the like. What is my question is what Russia is doing to propaganda. I can answer your question or offer other participants. Globally speaking, the very fact of independent Ukraine's being existent is the greatest failure of the Russian propaganda. We now are quite sure that a trilateral meeting between Trump, Putin, and Zelensky is not on the agenda because Russia hasn't accepted that. I can add I'd say this, we will never probably see that Russian propaganda is countered adequately. No country has tools in place. Ukraine has its strategy, information strategy. In February 2022, it worked pretty well. Afterwards, we could see that Western countries, Denmark, Sweden, Germany, Poland, well, you name it, have been helping Ukraine, and Russian propaganda couldn't stop the flow of assistance coming to Ukraine, and this should be attributed to the effectiveness of the Ukrainian information strategy. Well, there is no, so to speak, strong organization that would be called counter disinformation committee, but there is a strategy. All the details of the strategy cannot be divulged, so to speak, widely. Now, what I meant to say is that if Ukraine didn't have its information strategy, Ukraine would probably not exist either. And okay, I have another question. I'm sorry. Yes, we know that it's easier to take power rather than maintain it. I'm a Kievan, and I speak Ukrainian, doing my shopping, and can feel that some people around respond fairly aggressively to that. What I meant to say is that this round table might for instance, initiate the creation of, well, ministerial propaganda. I have a concept, if you wish to make use of it, because I do believe that you can lose a war, because currently there's a lot of emphasis. Well, the idea of the Polish-Ukrainian Confederation isn't as topical now. I don't think that we can create a joint ministry. Well, after all, as the example of the Ministry of Ukrainian Unity showed, it is not yet another ministry that is decisive, but what we all do together. Thank you very much, and I may invite you to share a small reception downstairs. Thank you.